What is up, everybody? Welcome to Critique Revolved, and we are going into a universe that we know so well. I'm your host, the one and only Bobby D, and in the studio with me is Steven.
Yo.
And Michael.
Hello.
And that universe is the View Askew verse. And we are going to cover...
Is that like the multiverse?
It is a multiverse at this point, and I believe so. We are going to cover Kevin Smith. Not Kevin Smith, as you know him today as, I don't want to say a shill, but the guy who sells everything, the podcaster, the public speaker, the DC guy.
TV show host.
Like, we want to get into what we grew up with him as, the movie guy. Because... for me, he's probably one of the bigger influences I had as like a teenager. Mm-hmm. He opened my eyes to movies in a completely different way. So what we're going to do in this episode is we're going to break him down as the person in his career. And then in the future, we will break down some of his more famous movies, some of his lesser known movies, and maybe introduce some of our audience out there to Kevin Smith as we know him. So, I'm going to start with you, Steve, because me and you have went to how many live Kevin Smith shows? A few. Three or four at least.
It's been a few.
Oh, I didn't know you guys do that.
Yeah, we went and saw...
Thanks for the invite, bro.
Well, you know, I don't know what to tell you, buddy. Yeah, we went and watched the Jay and Silent Bob cartoon
groovy movie. Yeah, and then we saw him right after he had his heart attack.
Yeah, we did see him after the heart attack.
So, what does this man mean to you? What was he to you, or is he to you? Stop speaking in past tense like he isn't still alive.
Well, I think it's interesting because
He's kind of dead.
Inside. No, you know, like you said, we grew up with him. He's Gen X like us. He's only about 9 years older than us, give or take. That's not that much older.
Not as you get older. The gap is smaller.
Yeah, it feels smaller.
It's because you get fatter and it gets smaller. Oh, we're not talking about penis, sorry.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I like you said, was first turned on to him in high school. And actually, the first film I saw was Mallrats. I didn't see Clerks until I went to college, and my college roommate popped it in, and we watched it. And so I knew him first and foremost, obviously, as a filmmaker. And it wasn't until years later at Wizard World Chicago that I ran into him and Jay in a hallway, exhibit hall, as they were going in to do what he does, right, speak. And I was like, that's Kevin Smith. He's at Comic-Con. Well, that Comic-Con. And then I started to understand,
the connection.
There's more to this. And now, Mallrats and all these, it
all makes sense.
It all makes sense. So what it means to me, I mean, again, I grew up with him in those formative years in terms of the films and the humor, and, you know, Brody felt like it was me.
Yeah.
Right? Like
everybody has a little Brody in them if you're a nerd.
Yeah.
So, Mike, your turn here. What I mean, you are in the industry. You know, what has he meant to you as somebody, you know, that has worked in the same field as him?
He was definitely one of my inspirations. He's one of those directors. He was there with Tarantino and Rodriguez. Those are like the three directors of the 90s that I just really clung to, I should say. And after seeing Clerks, actually I saw Mallrats first, I believe. And then I went back and saw Clerks. I was working in a video store, and it opened a whole new world to me. And he was just very important to my whole development as a film fan. He innovated so much with his films. You guys mentioned the multiverse. Yeah, like that's what he did. He was doing that at the same time Tarantino and Rodriguez were building their universe. This is before those were things.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah.
And it's just fascinating, this interconnected universe. That was one of the highlights for me, was how everything was connected in some way and how certain actors played multiple characters. It was fun. It was a great way to build a fandom before fandoms were really what they are.
Well, yeah, and you talk about that, and again, my first movie was Clerks. Funny enough, my aunts at one point won the daily lottery and moved from New York to New Jersey, so I remember getting Clerks from a video store in New Jersey, not knowing what it was, just knowing that it had all this praise and everything, and seeing something that I had never seen before. You know, Kevin Smith was the person that introduced people to the Jersey Shore before the Jersey Shore ever happened. You know, where you learned about the boardwalk and a lot of the things that happen on the East Coast. And you talk about that interconnected universe. And, you know, Steve, you talked about a lot about like even like the nerddom, like, you know, connecting to John Hughes films.
Yeah.
And, you know, things like Mallrats with Stan Lee. Like, did anybody know who Stan Lee like really,
I mean,
like used him like that?
Not like that, but I mean, we grew up hearing his voice in the cartoons, right?
Yeah.
So we knew who Stan Lee was, but like when you see him like in a film like that, you're like, whoa.
But it was funny because Kevin Smith was out there doing stuff that when growing up, for me, the nerddom wasn't as accepted as it is today.
No,
But
we
then
were
you go
ridiculed and beat up for it.
yeah, you go to why are you wearing a Batman shirt?
Right.
You know, why are you doing this? It's like it's fucking cool. Like you don't understand that. And then somebody like Kevin Smith coming into like the mainstream or as this indie film director and telling stories about Star Wars and like having these conversations that we have now behind these microphones as dialogue in fucking movies. It was just like, oh my gosh, this does exist outside of it. And Mike, you hit on like kind of the dialogue thing. We've talked about it before, is that his writing and directing, like the directing is there, but his writing and the way that he used words.
He's a better writer than he is a director,
Y-
by far. He is a good
Yeah.
director, or he was. But you're right. His writing is very good, and he has never gotten credit for that.
I think what he has always been able to do, he uses language and has used language in such a unique way, and then the way the actors always delivered the lines, it felt natural enough, but used words that were not normal vocabulary that most people would
I didn't know what a
use.
Nubian was.
What's a Nubian? But he just pulled off some pretty incredible feats, and I think it's interesting to me that years later, clearly George Carlin was an influence on him in that regard, and then to have George Carlin appear in a film when George Carlin was an incredible linguist and writer himself,
Yeah.
paying homage almost. That's interesting.
Well, and that's the thing when you deal with it. Like, again, for you guys that have no historical kind of knowledge of Kevin Smith, I mean, he was involved in Good Will Hunting. He, created his own universe. If you ever wondered, that's why he always has that over Matt Damon and Ben Affleck, is because he helped them out with Good Will Hunting to get that, to get their awards and get them started, and the introduction of Jay and Silent Bob being like these connecting pieces into a universe that is so much bigger than anything we've ever seen at this point. It was a multiverse without trying to be, or a universe without being a universe. It was the first time you hear it. But also introducing us to actors like Jason Lee and other people that he brought up, into these things, where it's like, oh, he was a skateboard guy that they just brought in to play Brody. And then, he goes on to Earl, and then,
became huge with that show.
Yeah. And then,
He started in that film. Jason Lee started in that film with David Schwimmer too.
He's been in a lot of things,
Yeah,
but I think
that
what
was
really brought him like mainstream notoriety was that long-running sitcom that
Yeah.
he did. It was hugely successful.
My mom watched it.
Yeah.
And is it Ethan Embry?
Who?
The Schooner.
Oh, I don't remember his name, but
But he was in Earl too.
He was in it as well, yeah. And he's gone on to do a lot of
Yeah,
really good
and
stuff.
so you see all these names of people that Kevin Smith has brought up into his movies, and they all will do anything for him, which is the craziest thing that you see. So obviously he was good at what he did and he enjoyed it, and it made people feel comfortable. Now, with all of this notoriety and everything else, most of his movies in the early part were independent films. And then you started seeing, people started backing him, some evil people in Hollywood that kind of own some of his movies at this point. You get to like a Chasing Amy and a Dogma type scenario, and you look at the story behind Chasing Amy, and that is probably one of my favorite Kevin Smith movies, and it's sure probably going to be one of the ones we break down, is that you have what is a woman struggling with her sexuality back in like the early 2000s. I mean, that movie could come out today and probably be huge.
You could argue all three of those main characters struggling with their sexuality in some sense by the end of it all.
And again, we'll get into that. But what you're talking about is a storyline. We always talk about, what do movies have longevity? A lot of the things that we see, when we have whole shows on the network about it for Critique Revolve, where we go back and we do retro reviews on things we haven't seen in years. Does it hold up?
Right.
And what you have when you have good stories like he was able to tell early on in his career is things that will hold up today, because he was talking about relevant issues and, with a little bit of humor, a little bit of sass, a little bit of nerddom that like made everybody relate to the stories that he was telling, that you could feel what the characters were going through. And that was all done by him. That wasn't done, by
studio mandates.
Yeah.
Or corporate mandates or, agendas. This was him truly interested in dissecting sexuality.
And to add to that, I just watched a brief clip earlier today from Sean Levy talking about the new Deadpool and Wolverine movie. And he made a comment in the interview about, making a film that for the widest possible audience, right? Kevin didn't do that. He's gone on record millions of times. He was making movies that he wanted to see, about stories that he wanted to see on film, that for him and his friends that they could enjoy, that they would never see otherwise, because nobody's going to make those kinds of films. And by doing so, he carved out this little niche, this little corner of the film world, and then opened the door for so many other people to go, we could make interesting films that are off the beaten path.
Well, yeah,
and not care about what's the widest reception or casting the widest net of audience or revenue, right?
You like me or you don't.
Yeah, watch it or not. I give a fuck.
What are you going to say, Mike?
Oh, no. Sorry.
Okay. So, again, with his writing style, his approach to storytelling, and again, being one of those big three kind of independent up-and-coming directors in that time, there was a lot going on, and he was able to, and you see this later on in his career, and we'll get into that in a little bit. You see it later on or early on in his career, to where he was able to give people like Brian Johnson Vulgar, and Vulgar's probably one of the worst movies I've ever seen, both because it's a fucking clown thing and just the content of it. But he was out there with, giving his people their just due, being producers on their films and growing this universe into it and using his fame to uplift his other people, not just leaving those guys behind.
I also want to bring up something that he also doesn't get credit for. And we got to go way back in the time machine here to even understand that this is a whole thing that just wasn't being done. There's this level of intertextuality to his films, meaning his movies, in a lot of ways, are movies about movies. It's like what Tarantino did with a lot of his films, where he is not afraid of references.
Right.
There are a lot of meta-narratives. They're talking to the audience through the discussion of movies. That wasn't done very often in movies because it was considered taboo, because when you mention things that reference aspects of the real world, producers and writers back in the 90s were really afraid of those aspects pulling audiences out of the film, because you don't want the audience to ever acknowledge that they're watching a movie. It removes them from the story process, being enveloped in the story. Kevin Smith showed that you can keep people entertained and bring them in by showing the audience that he's one of them, that he understands the movies and the comic books that you read and watch. He reads and watches these as well. It makes you feel like you're entering a community of people that you share so much in common with, if that makes sense. There's an instant rapport there. And he did that with the very first movie he did, Clerks. You know, you mentioned the Star Wars aspects, but there's so much more than just the Star Wars as well. If you look at every single one of his movies, there always is that postmodernistic twist where he's referencing other films.
Either films or comics, it's all there.
Yeah.
And to your point, it makes you, it resonates with you as a moviegoer or a movie watcher. You can relate to those characters or relate to that discussion.
You can relate to it, and then when you find people like the three of us in this room, that we all can relate to different things from those movies. And, you know, talking about his writing ability and everything else, he also is very quotable when you think about it.
And that's so important.
And you know, it's like, I don't, a cunning ruse. I don't, you know, and you think of things like that are just throwaway lines from movies that always
Try not to suck any dick on your way to the parking lot. Like, to this day, man, I will find any excuse to use that line.
Yeah, and
any excuse.
And then the guy walks out, and then Dante yells at him to get back in. You know, and the milkmaids, and, you know, there's just so much going on.
Even though I didn't watch Clerks until my first year of college, back in the days of AOL Online,
what's that?
I had downloaded
20 hours
through AOL somehow. I don't remember how. The WAV files, right?
Yeah.
WAV files of different audio clips from Clerks. And my Windows 95 computer, when it would boot up, would have the 37 dicks or 36 dicks clip in a row when it booted up. And I replaced the Windows startup sound with that sound bite. And so even when my mom fired up the computer, your girlfriend sucked 36 dicks in a row, and then you're in Windows.
But where else did you come up with things like that? You know, why I knew at like 16, 17 years old in Clerks what a snowball was.
Right.
You know, like just terms and things that he was using that just weren't normal part of anybody's like vernacular when it came to speech. Everything was like a flow type dialogue to where, you know, in today they'd be like, oh, that's improv. No, he was writing all that shit.
He was. And I'm sure there was a little bit of improvisation here and there, and because he casted just the right people, and in some cases casted his own friends, besides Jay, it felt natural. It just felt like you were just watching two people talk.
And like Mike said, it would be like if we ended up putting something together. I mean, people always say if you listen to the background of most shows, you just hear me say random things, and that's how the conversations went in a lot of those movies.
Yeah. That
you would hear somebody in the background saying something that would just pull everything together, and you're like, what the fuck is that? And you're like, well, that's how people talk.
That's why Clerks always, well, not just Clerks, but Kevin Smith in general with the early part of his career. And the same thing could be said about Tarantino. That was always the draw for me, was that I didn't feel like I was watching contrived dialogue, which is something we don't even realize we're watching because we've been conditioned to accept that when people get in a car, they only talk about what's relevant to the plot. But here comes Kevin Smith and Tarantino. No. Like, when people get in a car, they don't just talk about, like, the things that they're in the car to do. They talk about the ball game. They talk about the sex they had. They talk about jerking off. That's why it was so interesting, because it was a real depiction of how people actually communicate with each other.
Yeah.
So, you know, and again, it made for an easy viewing experience. It made for a multiple viewing experience because you would always find something new in every time you watched this movie. I remember spending weekends with my old 6-disc DVD player and just having them loaded with all his movies, and it would just go one after another. just going from one to the other.
What was the one you watched the most? Like, what was your
Mallrats is my absolute favorite movie.
I
Oh,
would
really?
have to say Mallrats is certainly the one that I've watched the most out of all of the films, and then a close second in terms of watching is Chasing Amy.
Yeah.
Just in repeated views.
It's so hard for me because I Chasing Amy is, in my opinion, should have been nominated for an Oscar. It's that type of movie. It's a really good film.
It's really
Dogma,
good.
I feel like, is his best work.
I think it's his most interesting work in terms of subject matter
Yeah.
and depth.
Yes.
But I told Bobby my favorite film that he's written and directed, where I think he actually did a stellar job as a director, is Red State. I think it is very underrated.
I agree, 100%.
And
I will say Clerks 2.
Is
I love Clerks 2 because I think this is the word that comes to mind. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful fucking. It's fun, but it's also, look at the substance. When do we get a movie about two dudes that love each other that's just straight? Showing how two dudes can just love each other.
Mike, can I tell you? And I'm not like calling you on. Is your list? Have you crossed Clerks 3 off yet?
I refuse to watch Clerks 3. I still haven't watched it because I just heard so many. I don't want to be disappointed in the Clerks franchise.
I will say this. So Clerks 2 is my third most repeated watch. And what other movie in the whole planet besides Bachelor Party would you ever see ever again a donkey show? There's only two that I know of on the entire planet that don't fall into like real porn. Not that I've watched one, but I'm just saying.
Uh-huh.
The fact that he put that in there, like, I mean,
dude, he at that time even in 2006 he was coming off his rise. I think he was coming down from his rise, but even in 2006 he was still Kevin Smith. The studio was going to do whatever he wanted to do at that time.
Yeah.
Nowadays, I think it would be a little more difficult for a studio to sign off on certain things because he's not the Kevin Smith he was.
Yes.
yeah. Well, and now everything's so self-financed and self-produced. I mean, he has done whatever the hell he wants.
Because he gets it crowdfunded and everything else.
Right. But I don't think he's pushed the same boundaries or envelope by any stretch.
Which I know you have a discussion planned down the road. We're going to talk about that, Bob, right? Like the career that he's on now and why.
Yeah. We'll get into that later in this show.
Oh, in this show, okay.
Yeah. So what like the reason I brought up Clerks 3 is because it might not be the best movie, but it is the completion of the Dante and Randall story, and I feel like you should watch it because it does get very if you like the emotion side of it.
Oh, it's deep. At least.
No,
It's very, very deep.
Okay.
If you like the aspect of 2 where it gets to that point of Randall and Dante having to come to terms with like their relationship and friendship and the women coming between that, so to speak, I think 3 is like a cherry on top.
Yeah, and it hits home for me for obvious reasons that I won't spoil.
Yeah, it's certainly a personal story. I would say just how Chasing Amy, I mean, all of his stories are personal to him as the writer, but like Chasing Amy was a very personal story that happened to him, and Clerks 3 is similar in that regard.
Yes.
Where it's a very personal story being told. So I wouldn't sleep on it, Mike, but definitely it's not going to be 1 and 2 for you.
No, 100%.
What about Jersey Girl? That movie does not get enough credit.
Let's get into that because
Okay.
I want to say that's where the downfall of Kevin Smith started.
1,000%.
Yeah.
What was Jersey Girl? And it was because it was the first movie that was done outside of the View Askew verse.
But it still had his flavor all over it.
100%. But it also had the flavor of
Studios?
the
whole
Jennifer
J-Lo thing.
J-Lo.
Yeah.
It was too wrapped up in the
I
Hollywoodness
forgot about
and the
that.
pop cultureness of those
Because
two people.
Those Ben Affleck and Jennifer, I almost said Lawrence Lopez. Jennifer Lawrence would have been like 6 years old when that came out. She was the little girl in the movie.
Yeah.
Had Geely Was that the movie?
Geely had come out
Yeah.
the same year.
And it absolutely bombed, and it was the worst thing ever. And everybody was like over the whole
Ben
Bennifer
Affleck, yeah.
thing. And when Jersey Girl came out, and okay, spoiler alert, they had to tell everybody that Jennifer Lopez dies within the first 5 minutes of the movie, which if you would have seen the movie and not known what was going on, that she was going to die in childbirth and that we were going to watch Ben Affleck as a single father having to raise this kid, might have been a completely different thing. But everybody knew what was going on in that movie because they had to go tell everybody, be like, hey, you're not getting a Bennifer movie. This isn't a love story. She fucking dies.
Yeah, I remember that whole
And you're just like,
controversy
oh
now.
my gosh, what's going on? Again, it's a movie I've seen multiple times, and I don't know that the hatred for it.
dude.
I've watched it one time, and that was enough for me personally.
The George
but-
Michael discussion is genius. There's plenty of great Kevin Smith stuff throughout the entire film.
Yeah.
I mean, the video store when he's trying to rent a porno. I mean, dude,
yeah,
it does not get enough credit.
Yeah, and again, I think it just had to do with the time frame. It's one of those things that if you go back and look at it without having the historical aspect of it, of what was going on in the world, and again, Bennifer was the first like combo fucking name,
Were
It
they-
really was, wasn't it? Like
it was
the first shipping name.
Yeah, the first ship that we ever heard was Bennifer, and it was like, Geely fucking sucks. Jersey
Yeah.
Girl's gonna suck.
That
Fuck
weighed so
Bennifer.
heavy, dude. That really is. Now that you bring it up, I do remember that is the reason why no one wanted to see that movie, because people, even Ben Affleck, had to go away for a long
Yeah.
time, and that's when he started getting into directing, because people did not want to see him in movies because the relationship between him and Jennifer Lopez just destroyed their images.
It did. Don't forget that when this was all happening, it was also around the time that she had just released a new album, and there was the music video of them on the boat, and he's like,
slapping her ass.
yeah, and it's like there was so much cringe around
Yeah.
that entire relationship.
Who's gonna want to go spend $6 at the time to go watch an hour and a half of them together?
Exactly, and I don't know if there was obviously behind the scenes what led to the casting decision of getting both of them.
It's probably fucking Ben going, if you're going to do this, can we at least bring her in for this small part?
Right.
Because how much was Jennifer Lopez acting at that time? She was a fly girl. She was a musician. She might have been in The Cell at that time.
I think she had been in The Cell. Maybe
That was the only thing I can remember her being early on, was that,
maybe that there was like a couple other things that she had been in. She'd been in a couple TV shows, but
There was also the lot of hate that probably people would probably shit on now because they would call it misogynistic, but there was a lot of hate about Jennifer Lopez because of her dating patterns. I remember there was a lot of dialogue and discussion about the fact that she seems to only date people when she needs something for her career.
Yeah,
So
because it was Diddy before.
Yeah, I was gonna
Affleck.
say, wouldn't it be Diddy?
correct. Yes. In fact, when she had an album and she was trying to like vamp or create a musical career because of her success on Selena, she started dating
Selena's
P.
the other
Diddy.
one.
And then when she realized, okay, well now I want to go back to acting, suddenly she's hanging from Affleck's
And
set.
then after Affleck, she went back to music and was hanging on
Mark
Anthony.
Yeah,
There was some people in between too. There was a dancing guy, and
Yeah.
and who gives a shit really who she's dating? But it's all about, when you're a star,
Perception.
it's all about perception, and that just really hurt her overall. And then by default, Affleck being involved, and then of course Jersey Girl faced the ultimate.
Yeah.
It was the ultimate target.
And when you look at Jersey Girl, like, George Carlin was in it again, playing old dad and everything else, and Liv Tyler. And there's a bunch of good actors and a bunch of other people that were working strongly with them. Again, like Mike said, it for me, it's not like my favorite movie, but it's not worth the shit that it got.
Not at all. Yeah.
Now, going from that, again, Kevin Smith had always worked on his own stuff. You always heard of him like, I'm only going to direct what I write. Well, then he got thrown a shit ton of money, and I believe this is what actually ruined his love of movies, was that we have a buddy cop movie with Tracy Morgan and Bruce Willis called Cop Out, which was originally called A Couple of Dicks, and they told him he couldn't call it that. So,
Right.
again, the studios got into Kevin Smith Bruce Willis was just a fucking jackass to Kevin Smith, and he said he was never going to do anything like this again. And I believe this is where I'm not going to say the downfall. I want to say the transition of him going from movie guy to pop culture guy, because Cop Out just didn't work for him. Directing somebody else's stuff didn't work for him. So you see him starting to transition into, at this time, I remember getting...
He started getting involved with crowdfunding.
Yeah. I remember this is when, Steve had said earlier that he had saw him at like a Comic-Con doing a speaking thing. And I remember this is when around this time is when you saw An Evening with Kevin Smith.
No, when I first saw Kevin, it was in like 2005.
Okay, so it was way after.
It was no, like way before
2000. But I'm just talking about we start the transition into him doing all these speaking things.
Oh, yeah.
And in An Evening with Kevin Smith came out. I remember getting it on disc from Netflix when Netflix was sending disc.
Maybe it was around. Let me look that up now that you mentioned it.
And you saw him start transitioning to being more of like this pop culture guy, to where he was getting...
That was 2002. So yeah, 2005 was when I saw it.
Yeah,
or 2004-ish, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, so he was out there doing the, starting to do the speaking things a lot more. And I think that's who a lot of people know him as today, is that, he started this podcasting network. He went around and he just wanted to talk his shit. And he would love to go out there and interact with his fans, because at this time, he was still kind of coming down from his peak, and there are a bunch of loyal people that have come to him. And so he would go around and sell out all these things and tell stories. And you would hear a different side of him and what was going on in the movies and his friends. And, the famous protesting dogma story. He would go and tell these things about himself, and he became much more of a personality than he was a director at that point. And with that, it came him getting offers to write certain things. The most famous one you will probably ever hear that he had told the story about was Superman Lives. That Warner Brothers came to him and said, "We need you to write this Nicolas Cage Superman movie," and he wrote a script, and you get the producers and everybody else getting in Kevin Smith's Kool-Aid, and you hear him tell a story about Superman has to fight a big robotic spider at the end of the movie, and the script kind of went to shit, and the movie got canceled. I think Tim Burton was signed on it at one point too.
Yeah.
After the Batman stuff. And, you hear him tell these stories, and you always wonder how much of that affected his actual Hollywood thing, that he was going out, like, kind of airing the dirty laundry that was out there, talking to the fans.
I think at that point, he knew that he was going to make some serious career changes, because at that same time is when he was also working on Red State, where he went 100% independent. Going to crowdfunding. And
was Red State fully crowdfunded? I thought that was still a Weinstein.
No,
was it not?
I think they ended up picking it up. I'm not sure, but the story behind Red State was that he wanted to prove a point that he didn't need Hollywood, so he crowdfunded it, and the movie was in the black before the movie even came out. There was no debt. That's when he realized that this is the new way to make movies. At least at that time, he thought that's the direction the industry would go with certain artists like himself.
It lists the production company as the Harvey Boys, which I don't know what that is, but it had a budget of $4 million, but only a box office of 1.8,
which is so disappointing, because
it should have been way more than that.
Okay, while you're researching, Steve, was Red State one of the ones that he went around to the movie theaters and did the speaking gigs? Because I know he started that with a lot of his movies, that you could watch Red State, and I don't know if it was actually released. It
says it was announced. He did a 1 week run at Quentin Tarantino's New Beverly Cinema, which made the film eligible for an Academy Award.
And it should have been nominated.
It should have been nominated,
Especially
and then it was
Michael.
released directly to video on demand after that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what we deal here when we see that shift into like more of the speaking, and then Red State comes out. For you guys that have never seen Red State is completely different than any other Kevin Smith movie. It is, again, outside of the View Askew universe.
Yeah.
And he starts going into more of a horror cultist type genre of movies, because he wanted to do something completely different than he had done before. And again, it's one of his better films. In you hear stories about that, and it's going to be one of the ones we covered because, again, it's like Steve's favorite Kevin Smith
I think
movie.
it's like a proper film.
Yes.
When we get into the breakdown, we'll get about like some of the controversy and stuff that's behind Red State. But Red State is definitely one of those things that is watchable. Is it watchable, Steve?
What,
Red State?
I think it's highly watchable.
No. I'm talking
Available.
about
yeah.
available.
Yes,
Oh,
it's.
It is not. No, it
it's
is
not?
absolutely Dogma and
So-
Red State, and there's one other one are impossible to get. If you can find them on Blu-ray, they are typically between $60 and $80 plus, if you can even find them. And you will have to buy them, in the third-party market of like eBay or
So
they're
you said the Harvey Boys, right?
that was the production studio.
So
of
the
it.
production studios. Kevin Smith had a long time backing with Harvey Weinstein, and I'm assuming that, and a lot of the movies that you cannot find by Kevin Smith are because the Weinsteins own them,
Right.
and they will not release them, and he does not want to make them any more money off of, on his name. So, there is some controversy behind the people that were backing him because Harvey was one of his biggest fans. And I've always said this, that if Kevin Smith went to crowdfunding and because we can't see Dogma, I would legitimately put $1,000
We said this
to help him buy Dogma.
when you pitched this show to me. We started talking about that, and I said, "Dude, if someone said, hey, donate $400 so that we can get out 4K versions of Dogma, I would gladly dish out $400 to help contribute. Absolutely would. If there's no way to get these films out, movies are important.
Well, and it sucks because you know how Walmart used to have those big ass bins
Yeah.
where you
The
could
$5 bin that
the
you would drop. Boy, I'd get drunk and go hang out in Walmart until I sobered up and buy a bunch of movies. I know exactly.
yeah.
about those.
And I remember distinctly seeing films like Red State and Dogma in that bin, and thinking, I didn't, it was before I actually bought any Blu-rays. I was still on the DVD thing, and boy, what a fucking regret. Because, like, seriously, I'm gonna look it up right now because the last time I looked it up, it was you can't buy them digitally either. Like, they are not available.
So, and there's no plans to get them out.
Zero.
No.
That is a travesty. I wonder how he feels about that. Really, as an artist.
Well, he's got his copies.
Well, yes,
And
but
he shows them at his movie theater.
but his films are. I don't want to get too serious, but movies are important to culture.
I agree.
And when you do
They're for
not
the
have
people.
access to them, especially in my opinion, his early work is important to cinematic history.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that it's difficult to get certain copies of films, it just seems not right.
There are only a handful of Red State copies right now on eBay. Okay, I can count them on 7 fingers, 8 fingers. And luckily, the price has come down. Not all of them are new and sealed, but they're about $35 to $60.
$60. Scratch this shit. Buy it now.
And Dogma,
Dogma was like $90.
Dogma's pricey.
Because I have like the 2-disc like Dogma that looks like the Bible.
Yeah.
So do I.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
But I only have not VHS.
VHS.
I have just plain DVD of all of his early films.
So on Blu-ray, Dogma starts around 60 and goes upwards from there, and the more features and extras. Here's one listed for $237.
Does Kevin Smith like introduce it for me?
No,
There's a Russian site that you can buy a lot of films now for like $5, and they send you 4K versions.
Really?
They're not true 4K, but they do their job.
Upscaling.
They do a pretty good job upscaling. Yeah.
So yeah, most of the Dogma ones are pretty pricey. I mean, you can get the DVD, and the one, Bobby, that you're talking about, the DVD that looks like the Bible. Here's one for like $25.
Oh,
But again, that's DVD.
not putting my kid through school on $25.
No. But it's unfortunate, like you said, Mike. It's like there are certain films that I think have a historical value from a cultural perspective, if nothing else. But it's unfortunate. I mean, it's just like all these studios that pull stuff off the streaming services or the video on demand buy rent services, and they're just constantly going and coming and going and coming. But these aren't going or coming. They're just gone.
If anything, this is a perfect case study as to why you should buy physical copies.
100%. I've
Yeah.
Agreed with that for a while. I know Steve pulls down his digital versions. Do you still do that?
Every digital version that I buy off Apple, I immediately go to my computer and download it and put it on an external drive. Now, the thing about that is it's still DRM.
Oh.
And so it's not like I could give you that copy to watch, but I'm less concerned about that and more concerned about, not that I think Apple's going belly up tomorrow or any company like that, but what happens if there's a disruption? Can I still watch it without authentication?
Well, that and what I always hate is when they upgrade the version of the movie that you had. Like you think of something like Star Wars, that there's 17 different versions from what was originally released in the 70s compared to now.
I don't mind it when I'm happily surprised and Apple's upgraded my 1080p to 4K. I'm
free.
Like, this is amazing.
But you don't want like the special edition or something like that.
That'll never happen. I have the what are they called? The despecialized edition of the original trilogy,
but
on Blu-ray.
But I'm just saying, like, in general, like, the physical copy is something that, I'm glad I didn't get rid of any of my old stuff. Like,
I did.
Yeah,
I took them down to Zia's and traded all that shit in.
Now they're on eBay for $25 a piece.
Exactly.
Christopher Nolan said something about this a few months ago when he was asked about physical media and the current trend that's happening on a lot of streamers where they're just pulling stuff and there's no way to access those particular titles any longer. And he said, well, you know what? This is why we should buy physical copies, because think of yourselves as basically collectors of history.
Yeah.
And like, that's a beautiful way of putting it.
And it's, again, no different than books and anything else. It's just...
The problem is with all of it, and this is part of the reason why I got rid of my CDs, and I wish I would have ripped them at like a higher bit rate before I did it, but even my Blu-rays, they just take up a lot of space.
Yeah, after a while when you...
Put them in that black safe hard drive you have, remember?
Well, that's what they all go. They all go in the hard drive, and they go in my. You're not wrong, Mike. They go in my fireproof safe.
Do they actually go in there for real?
I have a fireproof safe that has a backup of all of my life's work and all of my digital media.
When the world comes to an end, Steve's going to rebuild the Smithsonian with his
non-functioning computers because an EMP wiped everything out. But yeah,
but I have it.
There's a full frontal shots in there as well, Steve, for those ladies that want to break in and do an Ethan Hunt into that safe.
It's just me doing the elephant thing.
It's a long lens. So again, Kevin Smith kind of fell sour on the whole Hollywood thing, and then started reaching out and doing other things where he got to write comics, and he probably has some of the best Arrow runs that Green Arrow had were written by him. What was it? Cacophony by Batman.
Which one thing I appreciate more than anything about Cacophony, one is that he got to write Batman, which is like his dream, but also that he brought in his buddy Walt to do the art. And I mean, it goes back to even, and I didn't know this obviously until years and years later, like probably 20 years later, that his friends helped out not just in behind the scenes production of his films, but he put them in the films.
Yeah, Walt was like 3 different characters in Clerks.
And in Mallrats. And it's like bringing those guys in, and then to have like obviously one of your best buds is your counterpart, in Jay and Silent Bob, but to have that that there's not often in life where someone raises others up with them and around them like that. And then to see him do it again later with writing Cacophony, and then to see him do it yet again with all of the guys and be like, hey, run my comic book shop. Oh, and by the way, we'll get a TV show out of it too. Like, that's just unheard of.
Yeah. So we get into that where he's writing, and then he somehow becomes the authority on DC.
Somehow, yeah.
Somehow, magically, like anytime they need somebody to talk, he would be the authority on DC.
I mean, he's a DC fanboy.
Yeah, 100%. I'm not like doubting his thing. And then, for us, we saw him get into the TV side of it and start directing some of Flash and Supergirl, and usually he had some of the better episodes that we saw.
But he also was very clear that he didn't get to really
do anything.
That shit was so tight in terms of how they ran the ship. He was just more or less like there.
Yeah. It's like,
do you guys look at this part of his career favorably?
Which part? The
the part they're talking about now, this transition of his.
It's different. I appreciate that he was able to get a show that was, scripted, but the fact that we could watch Comic Book Men, which again, that would have never have happened 20, 30 years ago when we were kids. So to see that and have your local comic book shop on TV, even if it's scripted, but guys that like us that go into shops or cons to buy stuff and also sell stuff, to see that on TV,
the transactions,
that was cool.
So maybe that's why you guys look at it differently. Because I personally, I shun this side of his career. Like, I dislike it. I hated Comic Book Men. I do not like that entire culture in general. I love comic books.
But what about the podcasting side?
I hate the podcasting stuff. I hate his run on Flash. I hate his run. I hate that he's become the mouthpiece for DC. I think all of this dilutes his important work because people don't know him any longer for his important work. They know him for all of this mediocre bullshit.
Counterpoint. Yes, he wanted to make films, and yes, that was something that he aspired to do. But before all of that, he was a dude that collected comics and toys. And to see him have that,
the freedom to be able to do what
be able to have the freedom to eventually own Batman's house, which he talks about incessantly because he bought Ben's house. But the fact that he was able to have a comic book TV show and run a comic book shop. That's who he is. It's almost, to me, it's different, Mike, because it's like the filmmaker thing was like what he wanted to do, but I feel like doing that other stuff, that's really him. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I just feel like he hasn't. I mean, his last great movie. I mean, I was okay with Tusk, but his last great movie was.
Say it.
It was like Red State, really. 2011.
No, because when did Red State come out?
2011.
Was it?
Yeah.
God, we're fucking old.
But when was Zach and Miri?
That was way before. That was 2006. 2008.
Okay.
Yeah.
So fair. In fairness, that was his and maybe that was his high note where he should have maybe stopped. Although I do love Tusk. I think Tusk.
I think
awesome.
It's. I won't ever watch it again because it's
really
that type of body horror disturbs me.
Oh, it's totally disturbing.
But I did enjoy the movie a lot more than people were, saying it was. I enjoyed it more. But my point is, I'm trying to get back to what Bob was talking about. Like, I forgot what I was going to say. Go ahead. Sorry.
But no, you asked like if we appreciated this part of his career.
But look at it this way, Mike.
Because I get it. I totally get it. And Bob, you did a good job painting his career, painting the picture in order to understand his transition. At some point around Cop Out, he kind of just lost his fire because of the studio system and how they were just kind of fucking him over and it just didn't work out. And now he's using his money and his public image to kind of just have fun and do what makes him happy.
Yeah.
And I definitely appreciate that. So I get it.
So, but you got to think about it this way, Mike. When Comic Book Men came out, do you know what the lead-in was?
I don't remember.
Walking Dead.
Oh, yeah.
So not only did whoever at AMC obviously liked him enough to give him Walking Dead at its peak.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what was 12, 13 million people watching, whatever
It
it was.
a shitload.
And that was the lead-in.
More
So
than
how
20
many?
million.
20 million.
Yeah.
So 20 million people, and that was his lead-in for Comic Book Man, which got him, and everybody there paid because
Yeah. I
It-
mean,
Was that the big thrust into the second phase of his career?
I think that it was like another, if you want to think of it like a roller coaster, it was like the next high point was
Yeah.
Comic Book Men. But I would say that also coincided with him doing podcasts. And I don't think what people appreciate about Kevin and podcasting, he is one of the first and OG podcasters.
Joe Rogan and Kevin Smith were like the first two people that were podcasting. Rogan was on like live, whatever it was called, to where he would just sit at his couch and talk. And Kevin Smith was doing the same type of thing. But, when you deal with Comic Book Man, you deal with a show that's opening them up. And basically, all
Steve's right. 2007 is when Smodcast started.
Yeah, he was doing
Jesus
it like
Christ. I didn't know it was 2007.
It was so long ago. And so like
that was just Apple because Apple was the only one doing podcasts,
Yeah.
releasing podcasts at that time.
him and Mosier were doing it. And it's like and then he branched off and did all those different flavors. And of course Bobby and I were the Fat Man on Batman horrors. But I also listened to Smodcast because I listened to him and Mosier talk about film.
See, this is interesting because you guys have a way bigger knowledge of Kevin Smith as a individual, as a fan of Kevin Smith.
Yeah.
I know Kevin Smith as a movie director and writer in the 90s and up to like the mid 2000s. After that, I kind of just checked out because I didn't care about all that ancillary stuff that I thought was ancillary at the time, but it ends up being like a phase in his career.
Yeah.
So
and when you think about like someone who's like a mogul of a thing, this dude has had his fingers in all these different pies of medium.
Yeah.
Right? Like written form, comics, audio in the form of podcasting.
is he the real king of media?
Or you think he goes toe to toe with Howard, huh?
I think he's actually done more forms of media. Howard has done one.
No, he's done two. He did film. And he wrote a book, so that's three.
Yeah, I guess.
And Kevin Smith has done all those.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, if you really want to get down to
And
it.
he does them successfully.
You know
even
what
if
else
they're
he-
not my thing. You know?
Well, he's done some other things too, not so successful.
Well,
He
his-
got into NFTs.
Who didn't?
I didn't.
Well, I'm talking about celebrities. Like, so there were so many celebrities getting into NFT when it was first getting going.
Yeah. But and then he started the Wayne Foundation, for fuck's sake. The real life Wayne Foundation.
And again, you deal with him now, and unfortunately, a lot of people look at him, and me and Steve joke about it, that he's a shill, that, you give him something that he'll sell it, Jay and Silent Bob as a brand, with weed and
But that's okay.
That makes sense.
That's part of his brand. I'm okay with shit like that.
100%.
Yeah.
But and then
What about Jay and Silent Bob toys? I had that whole line, the Clerks.
the original toy.
Oh, yeah.
yeah.
Action figures,
Well,
yes.
and they've had multiple
Got 'em from
runs.
Suncoast.
Suncoast. Wow,
Jesus,
that's an old
It
name.
means you paid fucking a shit ton for
I
them.
did.
Suncoast
Yeah.
was the most expensive store in the fucking mall.
I think each little figure from Clerks was like $50. I think.
Whoa, jeez.
Yeah, Suncoast, fucking.
Wow.
Goddamn, I remember buying movies there for like $40, $50
Oh, yeah.
back in the day. And you're like, what the fuck?
They were just overpriced.
But it's the only place that had them. There was no internet.
oh man.
Fuck world.
Is that the running theme there?
Yeah, it's the more we talk about it. Yeah.
I'm trying to find a list of all the little things that he's
what
done.
Well, I mean, again, we have the podcasting, we have the weed, toys.
Yeah, memorabilia. Not just speaking engagements at like cons and stuff, but he does his own
tours.
comedy tours and did for many years. Maybe not so much recently, but for several years there, you know, in the 2010s to whenever, he was touring a shitload.
Yeah, he was hustling, you know, and again, An Evening with Kevin Smith, there's probably 3 or 4 of them. You know, he brought Jay Muse back from all his drug stuff and started traveling around with him saying, hey, we'll do these things as long as you keep clean. You know, he's always been that good guy that's going to take his friends around with him. You know, leading to that was he was going to do a Showtime special. You know, he was getting his break on Showtime to where they were going to do this live special. Where he had, in between sets, he had a heart attack. And he had to get his Widowmaker cleaned out, and he almost died right there doing it. And that's where the Weight Watchers Kevin Smith comes from, to where he went vegan, lost all his weight, and you started seeing a different side of him that was coming out that he had never talked about before.
But then he wouldn't shut the fuck up about it.
No, but I'm even talking about like the diddling stuff.
Oh.
You know, to where he came out on a, like, what was it, a YouTube People interview, you know, to where he talked about why he was the way he is. That,
yeah.
You know, there's a difference between, was it him, Kevin, and then Bob? Was that the 2 personalities he talked about?
Yes, there was, a mask, so to speak.
You know, to where he would go on and he would hide who he was because he had been sexually abused when he was younger and hid behind it. And then when he went on stage, he would put this, and then he lost who he was. Yeah. And I believe he came down to Tucson, right, and went to like a rehab facility to help him out.
Yeah.
And talk about these things. And so not only like was this man telling these stories, you know, 20, 30 years earlier, but then he's coming out and again, still telling a very personal story to himself.
And whether it's through film or through his podcasting or through being on stage, the dude wears his heart on his sleeve, unlike anyone I think I've ever encountered from that world of Hollywood. When you listen to someone talk, there always seems to be that,
you know, like,
yeah, like
let me put on the let me put on the rock thing, to where,
like the persona.
Yes,
and
like, this is who I am. Like the Rock is always going to be the Rock because he doesn't know any different at that point.
But and this was one of those cases where even he flipped the script to say that for all these years, that was my Rock that you were seeing.
Yes.
And that was like a holy shit moment for me, because then it's like this whole time he was the genuine article to an extent, and then pulls back the curtains and is like, this is the genuine art. It's like, holy shit. To me, to put that out there like that, you just don't see that often.
No, you don't want to be. A lot of people aren't confident enough to be that vulnerable in front of people, especially in the day and the age of the internet, to where everybody's like, your fat fucking ass should have been fingered.
Dude, even
don't cut that out.
Even
Unless
being
that Thomas and Rain Man.
Even being that vulnerable to family or to close friends, or sometimes even to a therapist,
or to yourself,
that's the first step.
Looking in the mirror
and accepting and not denying it to yourself.
Man in the mirror.
Yeah, Michael Jackson, exactly.
So
you get it, Mike.
So I mean, this dude has had such like an up and down and turbulent life, and he's still living his best life.
Maybe not the life that he would ultimately want, given all those ups and downs.
Not the life that I want him to live. I want him to just direct movies.
But that's the thing. Like what director has longevity anymore?
None.
Martin Scorsese.
Yeah, but he probably
Longevity
should.
because he makes 30 fucking hour-long movies.
His movies aren't as good as they used to be either. So I mean, that's
no, they're not.
Most directors have, even if they last, their work doesn't hold up.
Like 2 to 3 minutes last.
It's so stupid.
Well, when you get to that age,
You don't even start. It's just dead.
can't finish.
Although I don't think, film-wise, I don't think Kevin Smith has peaked. I think he has a few more really good films in him.
I don't know, man. The last
Okay,
few.
So let me ask you this, Mike.
Yeah.
Because of the way Hollywood's going to where we're not seeing like the big box office budget thing, do you think we could see a resurgence of people like Kevin Smith coming out with storytelling movies again? Because there doesn't seem, or at least I don't hear about them as much as I used to, like in that era of the late 90s, early 2000s. Is it open for somebody like Kevin Smith to come back in and sweep Hollywood again?
I think so. I don't think we're there yet, but eventually we're going to get to a point where the films that are going to be made that are not box office IPs, you're going to probably see indie producers and directors really making that strong push again into cinema, much like what happened in like the 70s and 80s. And then kind of ended in the 90s. But yeah, I can see it happening. Whether or not Kevin Smith will be able to make a successful film, I mean, that remains to be seen. But my question, because his films have changed, do you know, because you guys are more involved in his recent career, has he lost a producer that usually has worked with him? Because usually when
Mosier was the one who produced. Mosier went on to work in animation and was disappeared. Scott Mosier disappeared for a long time. It was well over a year and a half, maybe even longer than that, where he wasn't even doing like the podcast with Kevin for a long time. And it's because he went off to make that film, The Grinch, the animated movie.
Oh, okay.
And
well, the reason why I ask is because oftentimes you can pinpoint when someone's career drastically changes, at least in quality when it comes to movies. It's usually because somebody parted ways, like a producer, someone that was like that buffer that helped them see certain mistakes. Oftentimes directors are too close to material. That's why when you can get a good executive in a studio who understands movies and he's not just about dollars and he's a douchebag, oftentimes we get some of the best films when you have an executive producer from a studio who knows his shit teams up with a creative director. It happened with Tarantino's career too. That's the reason why his style of filmmaking changed drastically between Pulp Fiction and Kill Bill, because he lost one of his longtime producers. So typically that's one way of being able to pinpoint a change.
so I'll say this. I would agree, Mike, but let me throw you a counterpoint. So he worked with Mosier. I mean, there was other producers on some of these other films, but when he started self-financing or crowdfunding the films to be made, it's almost like George Lucas when he did the prequel trilogy, and it was like, I'm doing what I want to do, and no one can tell me what I can and can't do because I'm self-funding this and I'm doing it. And yes, Lucas had Rick McCallum as an executive producer, but everybody just pandered to whatever George's whims were. Now, had George had that a stronger producer or opposing voice, maybe things would have been a little bit different for the better.
Well,
right?
You're on. Yeah, you're right.
And so I think maybe in recent years, that's more of maybe what happened is that he was just doing what he wanted and had no guardrails.
You could be right.
Yeah, looking up Mosier, he hasn't done anything since 2019.
Which was after The Grinch, right? Because The Grinch flopped, unfortunately. It did
they
not
didn't show him as a producer on The Grinch.
I think he might have been the director of The Grinch.
So he hasn't produced anything since 2019. But
yeah.
Anyway, So yeah, it could be that. But again, I don't know if we are to that point to where I think Kevin has got to have a story to tell for him to want it.
Yeah.
Because he has gotten back in the good graces of Affleck, because that was when Affleck went to the other Jennifer. She didn't like Kevin, so he wasn't allowed to be around him. And so, you still have him with his strong Hollywood ties. Rosario Dawson loves him. Like, you have all these actors that will back him. And I think that's why I asked about that independent thing is, like, if it could happen, this is probably the dude that have it. Because over the years, you even talk about, like, Grant Gustin and Melissa from the DC TV shows. They all fucking love him. And he's able to draw these people in with his personality, his work ethic, and everything else, that these people will go out and do stuff for him. And you see them appearing in, some of his films, that the Jay and Silent Bob reboot, and some of these things where you're just like, oh shit, look, he's got a lot of fucking people that'll just show up and do stuff for him.
Yeah.
So you could see that happening if he found the right project to write. He got Johnny Depp for Yoga Hosers, right?
Yeah,
and also Tusk. It was one of the best parts about Tusk.
And Tusk, so he does have the connections there to draw in some big names and bring his friends back and do what he was doing. Will we ever get there? Will it ever be at his peak? Is it going to be a bunch of member berries?
I hope not. I hope he has a few more things in him.
You look at a movie like Tusk that didn't get reviewed favorably, but he has it in him. I mean, Tusk was just a few years back, and look what he did. Great point bringing up Johnny Depp. I mean, first off, didn't even recognize Johnny Depp until he started talking more. And I'm like, holy fuck. Like, this is acting right here. When you can't really recognize the actor because he's that good, and you have Kevin Smith directing it, that movie and that whole aspect brought me back to Kevin Smith for a very short time. It reminded me why I liked him. And then they had these plans. Maybe you guys know what happened. There was supposed to be multiple movies made that focused around Johnny Depp's character as a detective.
I didn't know that. Maybe he talked about it on the podcast, but even
it never happened though. He just had like a random appearance in that Hosier film, right, or whatever it's called.
Yeah, Yoga Hosers with his daughter.
Yeah, and because Harley and Johnny Depp's daughter, I think they maybe went to school together or something.
Yeah.
They were friends, so that's probably how he got Johnny. But regardless, Johnny was willing and able and did a great performance. But I didn't even go back before, like Justin Long, dude, like as in Tusk. Think of him in Zack and Miri. The role he played in Zack and Miri is one of the standout roles. And this was a guy that cut his teeth in a fucking Apple commercial.
Yeah, he was the cool Apple guy.
He was the cool Apple guy.
Yeah.
Like, what?
And that's why I say I feel like he can do it if he really wants to. And it goes, I guess it kind of goes back to what you were saying, Bob, that if there's a story he really cared about, he probably would deliver like a really fine film, because there's no way you could look at his body of work up until, I don't know, let's say 2011 and say, yeah, this guy is out of talent. When you make films like that, you don't just run out of talent. I think it just comes down to your passions at that moment, right?
And I'm going to make a comparison here, and you guys tell me if it's wrong. When you look at somebody like M. Night, who ended up being a one-trick pony, and then you look at Kevin Smith, kind of the same era of film, and he's able to do these comedies. He's able to do like serious kind of love stories, horror films, suspense type things. Like he's cut his teeth in so many different genres to where somebody like M. Night, you talk about one-trick ponies. It's just like, I wonder what's going to happen at the end of this. I realize you like Alfred Hitchcock. Let's go. Let me just fast forward to the end. Okay, the person was dead the whole time, type shit. Like, he always tried to do that.
Kevin has more
range.
Diverse range, yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
And I would say this, too. You said something key there, Mike, that caught my attention. The last couple of things that he did make were not even remotely as successful, even in the fan base, as previous. I don't think the film that he was supposed to make about the Jeep character, you know which one I'm talking about, not the from Popeye or whatever the fuck. Remember there was like that third movie that was in the Tusk yoga hosers.
Oh,
it's in the notes under untitled things.
I don't know if that movie ever came to fruition, but Mike, something you said just hit me. It's and it takes me back to the very ending of Chasing Amy, where Holden, talks to Alyssa at the very end, and he says, I finally had something personal to say. Maybe he just, at this point in time, beyond the heart attack, doesn't have that personal thing to say just yet.
Yeah.
Maybe there's something percolating that we just don't know, and he will someday.
Yeah.
But I hope that when that happens, it's really personal or really.
Well, that's his best work.
Yes.
Is the personal, is the intimate portraits that we get of these characters. That's where he really shines.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, unless I don't know. I mean, we can debate, we can talk about this all day to try to figure it out, but I just refuse to accept that you run out of talent. I think it just has to do with passion.
No, yeah,
right?
it's passion.
Yeah.
It's a story. It's there. It's
a spark. Something, there has to be a spark there, right? I think any creative endeavor, by any creative person,
you gotta have the want.
You gotta have the want. You gotta have a spark. It's not something that you just crank out like sausages.
Maybe we should burn his life down, like just to help him find his passion again. Maybe we should start
I think
tracking him down.
I mean, I think he
flatten
burnt
his
like his
tires.
life burnt down. He lost his dog, had the heart attack,
and then came out publicly about being diddled. I don't know how much more hard you want this guy to
how
have.
hot do you need this fire, Mike?
Yeah, fuck.
Well, obviously it's not hot enough.
Turn up the heat.
He's like, I'm writing, I'm trying. Like
we need to break him in order for him to.
Meanwhile,
puts
he's
the
sitting
lotion
over
on while it writes.
He's sitting over a fucking typewriter, just sweating bullets
listen,
for Mike.
Is this fucking Misery?
I'm gonna write a new movie. It's gonna be about an obsessed fan that wants to help his favorite director find his passion again.
Okay, Misery.
Yeah, I'm gonna do it.
Yeah.
It'll be Misery Part 2.
Misery 2.
I think there is a Misery too.
The search for more misery. Is there really?
I think there
Misery
is,
2, the
dude.
search for more misery.
Yeah, it's Misery 2, the college years. I'm not even kidding. That's what it is.
That's a real thing.
Wait, no, it's not. Shut up.
I'm not kidding.
It's called the college years? Like it's Saved by the Bell?
Oh, they just gave up.
Misery 2, the college years.
No.
That's a
Oh
lie.
my God, you're right.
The college years?
That is disgusting. Whoever.
Stephen King.
Is that Stephen King? Was
I
it
don't know. I don't know.
Kathy Bates as a young freshman not understanding what's going on.
Yeah.
Oh my God. So anyway, that's a retrospective into Kevin Smith from what we know him as today to what he was. The greatness is there, and I hope with this series of Critique Revolves we're able to show you the greatness. Again, we will be breaking down some of our favorites films throughout the year.
Hollyweed.
Holly.
I'm gonna start with that one.
You know what the funny thing is? It's like you look at all the things that were canceled on him, and you're just like, oh, I remember that. I remember that. You know, there's been a bunch of stuff that he's probably written. You always wonder what his black safe looks like, Steve. What he has back there that is written that is just like, oh, well, you know.
Even just before I came here, I happened to see a clip of Stallone on his Instagram account talking about, he was like in his office talking about, you know, all of the memorabilia. And he's like, you know, I often get asked what my favorite piece of memorabilia is. And he's like, it's actually all of my writing. And he starts panning his office. And they're nicely bound. I don't know who did it for him.
Wait, who? Kevin Smith did this?
No, Stallone.
Oh, Stallone. Okay.
And there are just
Fucking bunch of
volumes
Crayola books.
and volumes of books that he has allegedly written.
Dialogue in.
Yeah, and there's a couple, obviously the Rocky ones, but there was a ton of them, all bound similarly, but only a couple of them had titles on the side. So it's like, what's he got going in those other books that he apparently has pages in them? But maybe to your point, maybe that's Kevin's got a bunch of I'm sure he has a ton of shit.
A lot of stuff, yeah.
Just
sitting.
notes. And I mean, look at Mike. Mike's got books of notes.
That's true, and Ryan reads them sometimes.
That's weird. Like your diaries.
He opened up one of them just because I think he was distracted.
And it was just dick
and then he
pics.
realized that it's personal stuff. And he like,
It's just big giant
so
pencil
dumb.
dicks and
This is my wiener book.
yeah.
Like,
big
I
veiny bastard.
Troll dicks and boobies in this one. People think I'm deep because I have a journal, but not really.
Yeah. Dear diary, dick. So we will we will be breaking down things like Clerks and Chasing Amy and Dogma and Red State. Maybe we'll go back and watch Jersey Girl, and see, what holds up, and we'll use it and we'll use our critical eye. Because again, this is not going to be a blowjob fest on Kevin Smith. Yeah, I mean, we all
He
look
fillets himself enough, I
Yeah.
think.
Well, I think we all look at stuff a lot differently than we did when we were younger. We're talking
Yeah.
about stuff that is probably 20 years old. A lot of it holds up because I still watch it today.
Dude, we're
But-
about to hit. In fact, Mike, correct me. Was it 2 years ago? Clerks was the 30th anniversary.
Something like that, yeah.
And-
Clerks came out in what, 94?
No, 92.
92.
Or 91. And Mallrats was 92.
Why does this say 94 though?
93?
I'm looking and Clerks says 94, which is not right.
That can't be right.
On IMDb, it says 1994. That's not right. And Mallrats came out in 1995. That is completely inaccurate. Is it?
Or are we old and losing our marbles?
Yeah, I remember it being too young to watch Clerks. Because
I might
my
be
dad
getting-
didn't let me watch rated R movies.
I might be getting my stories wrong then, yeah.
Okay,
I'll have
so
to do some research.
Clerks
This-
94, Mallrats 95. So again, even if it is 94, then that's this year's the 30th anniversary of Clerks.
Wow.
Next year will be the 30th of Mallrats.
And we get no special releases of any of these.
No, and Chasing Amy will be 97. Fuck, Dogma 99. Yeah, we're not going to get any special releases or
Some of
any
these are owned by
fanfare.
Disney now, right? Aren't they? Because it was
No.
Miramax.
Yeah.
Did Disney buy Miramax?
Yeah. A long time ago. Weinstein sold it to Miramax, or they sold Miramax to Disney, and then they opened up Weinstein Company.
That's where the Weinstein Company and then the Harvey Boys thing came from because of them getting sued. So, but anyway,
Wow.
we will get into breaking down these movies, going back and looking, and again, we want to bring you on a ride with us through somebody that we respect the work, that influenced our work. Fuck, my daughter's named Harley Quinn based on the fact that Kevin Smith named his daughter Harley Quinn.
And if he can do it, by God, so can I.
And I sucked 47 dicks in a row because
47
of-
because you wanted to be
10 more.
10 upper.
yeah.
Oh, what was it? 37?
37.
Oh,
You went
37.
10 higher than
You
you
went
needed
10
to.
higher. Dude, you sucked way too many dicks.
Oh,
Way
shit.
too
Can I
many
take
dicks.
10 back?
I
You
mean,
can't ever take a dick back.
yeah. I mean, once it's in you, it's there.
It's in you. But I was just looking too. The last several years of him not having anything going on, at least it just occurred to me, he was busy making the He-Man cartoon.
Yeah, He-Man cartoon. We didn't even get
Oh,
to the
that's
Netflix
right.
stuff.
Yeah, he was making the He-Man cartoon. That's a lot of work.
Yeah. I forgot about the He-Man cartoon.
So did I. That was actually a big one for him
Yeah.
for his
Yeah.
career, yeah.
Yeah, and controversial for some people.
Yeah.
So we will get into that. We'll probably start with Clerks. Let's just start at the beginning.
Yeah.
So Clerks will be Randall's my spirit animal.
I could see that.
Yeah.
A lot, actually. Now that you say that,
I feel like Randall is all of our spirit. Maybe you and me, but yeah.
Randall is one of the greatest characters ever in movies for me.
Yeah. Agreed. 100%.
in all the movies.
Yes.
So we'll probably start with Clerks. Hey, why not if it's going to be an anniversary year? Anyways, it sounds like a good spot to start.
Yeah.
So we will come at you with that. Remember, however you found us, rate, review, subscribe. We appreciate every one of you. And welcome to the View Askew universe.